A judge questioned Karoline Leavitt's tactics in court, and moments later, FBI agent David Marshall uncovered a spy's secret device. You won't believe what happened next. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. The courtroom at the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. was steeped in intense silence as Karoline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, stepped through the heavy wooden doors. Her hand gripped the leash of Bruno, a German shepherd with a long, jagged scar running down his left flank. Every eye in the room turned toward her as she made her way to the center, her steps both hesitant and resolute. Bruno, with a calm yet vigilant demeanor, paced steadily beside her, his ears perked as if ready to detect anything out of the ordinary. Karoline was no ordinary witness. She was here as the White House spokesperson, overseeing the trial of James Carter, a former Pentagon official suspected of spying for China. Her role was to ensure sensitive information remained protected. But the situation held a significant unknown. Could she uncover something others had missed? Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. Judge Michael Sullivan, a seasoned legal veteran with silver-streaked hair, leaned forward slightly, observing Karoline with a calm yet piercing gaze. He understood the case carried exceptional weight for national security, a conspiracy against President Donald Trump's administration. Across the courtroom, James Carter sat at the defendant's table, his face eerily composed, almost smug. At 50, he had once been an unremarkable military analyst, but now stood accused of selling national secrets to a foreign power. Carter was arrested after a tip indicated he attended a clandestine meeting with Chinese operatives. Yet his defense was formidable. No concrete physical evidence, no confession, and his legal team was primed to dismantle every accusation. But then an unexpected moment unfolded. As Karoline took her seat, her sharp green eyes met Carter's. Her fingers trembled slightly as she made a subtle gesture, a secret signal only those with rigorous training would recognize. It was the cue she had coordinated with Bruno, a dog trained by the Trump administration to detect listening devices and unusual behavior. Only two figures in the room caught the signal, Bruno and Judge Sullivan. Bruno's reaction was instantaneous. As Karoline's fingers tapped lightly on the table, a silent command. The dog's body stiffened, ears pricked, muscles coiled like a spring ready to launch. A low growl rumbled from Bruno's chest, a sound both warning and menacing. His golden brown eyes locked onto Carter, unwavering, their intensity almost piercing. The reaction sent a chill through the courtroom, murmurs rippling through the onlookers. Bruno's behavior wasn't merely that of a trained dog. It was something deeper, almost primal instinct. Judge Sullivan slammed his gavel on the bench, the sound echoing like thunder in the room. "Court is recessed for 15 minutes, he declared, his voice carrying a rare urgency. Prosecutor Emily Carter shot him a questioning look, but Sullivan didn't respond. Instead, he glanced at Karoline, who stood beside Bruno as if the dog were her steadiest anchor. Something significant had just happened, and he needed time to process it before proceeding. As the courtroom emptied, Sullivan remained in his seat, his mind racing. In all his years on the bench, he had never seen a trained dog react with such uncanny certainty. What had Bruno detected? And more crucially, what did it mean for the case? Outside in the hallway, Karoline knelt beside Bruno, her hand gripping his fur tightly. Patricia Leavitt, her mother, bent down beside her, brushing her daughter's hair with trembling hands. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" she whispered. Karoline didn't answer, but she didn't need to. Her grip on Bruno tightened, her body pressing against the dog as if seeking comfort. A few steps away, FBI agent David Marshall observed the scene. A seasoned investigator, Marshall had a keen instinct that had cracked numerous high-stakes cases. Now that instinct told him the courtroom incident was a turning point. He approached Judge Sullivan, his voice low. "I'd bet my badge Bruno picked up something off about Carter." Judge Michael Sullivan exhaled slowly, his deep blue eyes narrowing, their sharpness cutting through to the truth. "Then we need to figure out what it is," he replied, his tone unshakably resolute. In the defendant's private room, James Carter sat across from his attorney, Richard Hayes. Alone now, the smugness on Carter's face melted away, replaced by a cold, calculating edge. His fingers drummed incessantly on the wooden table, his mind replaying the courtroom moment. Karoline hadn't said a word, but that dog had reacted. She knows something, Carter muttered under his breath. Hayes raised an eyebrow. What? Carter forced a strange smile. Nothing, he said, but his mind was in chaos. That damn dog. He hadn't counted on it being a problem, but now, Carter realized, Bruno might be the key to unraveling his entire scheme. As the 15-minute recess neared its end, Judge Sullivan adjusted his robe and took a deep breath. He didn't believe in coincidence, and his gut told him Bruno had just handed them a critical clue. It was time to dig deeper. For the first time since the trial began at the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., he felt the momentum shifting. The courtroom buzzed with tension as everyone returned to their places. James Carter, the former Pentagon official accused of espionage for China, sat motionless at the defendant's table, his eyes now betraying a flicker of unease. Prosecutor Emily Carter prepared to resume questioning, but all attention zeroed in on Karoline Leavitt, the White House spokesperson, and Bruno, the German shepherd with the long scar along his left flank. Bruno was no ordinary dog. He was specially trained by the Trump administration to detect listening devices, explosives, and erratic behavior. His presence in the trial wasn't just symbolic, it was a top-secret security measure Karoline had insisted upon. Emily Carter stepped forward, her voice sharp yet composed. Your Honor, we have evidence that Mr. Carter communicated with Chinese operatives for months, passing classified Pentagon information. She presented a stack of documents, but Richard Hayes shot to his feet. Objection! This is speculation, Your Honor, Hayes said smoothly. No recordings, no photos, just testimony from unreliable sources. Karoline, seated near the prosecution table to oversee sensitive information, tilted her head, studying Carter. She noticed something off, the way he clenched his fists when Hayes mentioned recordings. Without hesitation, she tapped her fingers lightly on the table, a secret signal she and Bruno had practiced for years. Bruno's response was immediate. He sprang to his feet, ears erect, nose sniffing the air rapidly. Then, with laser focus, he bolted toward the defendant's table, sniffing around Carter's chair. A low growl rumbled from Bruno's chest, his golden brown eyes fixed on the area beneath the table. The crowd in the courtroom began to murmur, whispers spreading like waves. Judge Sullivan banged his gavel, his face stern. "What's happening, Miss Leavitt?" he demanded, his voice commanding. Karoline stood, her tone calm but cutting. "Your Honor, Bruno is trained to detect listening devices. I believe there's something in this room we haven't seen." David Marshall, stationed near the door, moved in swiftly. He knelt beside Bruno, following the dog's lead. Under Carter's table, he found a small black device, no bigger than a coin, blinking with a faint red light. "A listening device," Marshall announced, his voice ringing through the courtroom's dead silence. Carter paled, his hands visibly trembling. Judge Sullivan slammed his gavel again, harder than ever. "Court is adjourned." "I'm ordering an immediate sweep of this entire area," he declared, his icy gaze fixed on Carter. Emily Carter looked at Karoline with a mix of awe and admiration, while Richard Hayes whispered frantically to his client. Karoline stood still, her hand resting lightly on Bruno's head, her eyes gleaming with confidence. As Judge Michael Sullivan's gavel echoed, the security team at the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., sprang into action. David Marshall, still holding the tiny listening device found under James Carter's table, handed it to a nearby technician. He turned to Judge Sullivan, his voice firm. "We need to analyze this immediately." With graying hair and sharp brown eyes, Marshall was a veteran FBI agent in the counter-espionage unit, having spent decades hunting ghosts in international conspiracies. He muttered under his breath, "I've seen these before, Chinese tag." Unmistakable. His partner, Sophia Evans, stepped up beside Karoline Leavitt, who remained steady next to Bruno. Sophia's voice was soft but resolute. "Miss Leavitt, did you notice anything unusual before signaling?" Karoline nodded slightly, her hand resting gently on Bruno's head to keep him calm. "I saw Carter tense up when the prosecutor mentioned recordings. His behavior didn't match his earlier confidence," she replied, her tone crisp yet composed, reflecting her experience as White House press secretary, navigating countless high-pressure situations. Sophia and David exchanged a quick glance. "Body language," Sophia whispered. "He's hiding something." Prosecutor Emily Carter approached, clutching her files, her eyes flashing with determination. If that device was active, it could have recorded everything in this room, including what Carter didn't want us to hear, she said, her voice tinged with hope. But David shook his head, rubbing his temple. We need more than that. A listening device alone won't directly tie him to China, not unless it has specific data linking Carter. Emily turned to Karoline. Are you sure Bruno only reacted to this device? Karoline gave a faint smile. Bruno's trained to detect any threat, devices, explosives, even unusual behavior. If he alerted, it's not just this device. Meanwhile, outside the courtroom, an unexpected witness emerged. Laura Thompson, a retired Pentagon employee who once worked under Carter, approached David, her voice steady. I heard about the dog. I have information. I saw Carter meeting a stranger in the Pentagon parking lot. He handed something over. I don't know what, but I remember the other car's license plate. It started with XJ. David's eyes lit up. That's a lead, he said, jotting it down quickly. Laura nodded. I didn't speak up sooner because I was scared, but if he's really a spy, I can't stay silent anymore. As the security team swept the courtroom, Karoline stood alone with Bruno in the hallway, her hand stroking his fur gently. She felt the gravity of the moment. This case wasn't just legal, it was a fight to protect national security, a duty the White House had entrusted to her. Bruno looked up at her, his golden brown eyes radiating unwavering loyalty. She whispered, "We'll get to the truth, buddy." But deep down, Karoline knew Carter wasn't acting alone, and the listening device was only the tip of the iceberg. In a corner of the courthouse, inside the FBI's temporary office, David summoned the tech team to analyze the device. The room smelled of sanitizer and hummed with the clatter of equipment. On the table, Bruno, the German shepherd with the long scar down his left flank, had once been among the finest canines in national security, trained by a special unit under the Trump administration. He could detect threats invisible to humans. The scar on his body was a testament to a heroic act. Bruno had once tackled a bomb-carrying suspect during a raid, suffering severe injuries but completing the mission. Afterward, his mobility impaired. He nearly faced retirement, until Karoline insisted on keeping him as her partner and right-hand companion. David glanced at Bruno, then at Karoline through the glass door. "That dog's not just a pet," he muttered to Sophia. "It's our secret weapon." Sophia nodded, and Karoline knows how to use it. If Carter's really a spy, Bruno's the one who'll expose him. Bruno had once been deemed unfit for service after his injury in an anti-terror raid. That was before Karen Phillips, an animal training expert with the National Security Unit, stepped in. Phillips had run the Special Canine program for years, specializing in animals that could assist in high-risk missions. When she heard about Bruno's case, she fought to keep him, convinced his sharp intelligence and unwavering loyalty still held immense value. And now, at the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., she was about to see her faith rewarded. Karoline Leavitt stood in the FBI's temporary office just off the courtroom, her hand gripping Bruno's leash tightly. Bruno, the German shepherd with a long scar along his left flank, sat calmly beside her, ears erect, golden brown eyes scanning everything with a vigilant stillness. Karen Phillips entered, kneeling at Bruno's level, her voice soft but firm. "Hey, Bruno, you're a special dog, aren't you? Trained to catch what humans miss." Bruno didn't move, just stared at her, his presence steady and unthreatening. "Want to test his skills?" Karen asked, turning to Karoline. Karoline nodded, her gaze sharp. "I saw him react in the courtroom. If there's anything else off, Bruno will find it." Karen gave Bruno a small command. "Search." The dog rose instantly, nose sniffing the air, then moved slowly toward a corner of the room. Karoline watched, her heart beating faster as Bruno paused near a chair, his nose pressed close to the floor. Karoline nodded at Karoline. "If you're ready, give the signal." Karoline tapped her fingers lightly on the table, the secret signal she and Bruno had trained with together. Bruno reacted instantly, lowering his head and stepping slowly but determinedly toward the chair. As his nose brushed the chair's leg, a subtle shift occurred. Bruno froze, ears perked, then let out a low growl. David Marshall, standing nearby, rushed over immediately. He knelt, following Bruno's lead, and discovered a tiny object hidden beneath the chair's cushion. Not a listening device, but a miniature signal transmitter. "This is encrypted tech," David said, his voice tinged with astonishment. "It could send data out without anyone knowing." Emily Carter, the prosecutor, entered the room, clutching a stack of files, her eyes lighting up at the new find. "This is the evidence we need," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. "If Carter used this in the courtroom, every lie he told could have been sent straight to his accomplices." David nodded, though cautious. "We need to analyze its data. If it ties back to China, he's got no way out." Karoline stood still, gently stroking Bruno's head, feeling the unique bond with the dog. Since taking Bruno on as her companion at the Trump administration's suggestion, she'd known he wasn't just an animal. He was an indispensable part of her work safeguarding national security. Bruno looked up at her, as if fully aware of his role. In the days that followed, Bruno and Karoline became inseparable. Though she didn't need him to overcome personal trauma, Bruno was her second set of eyes and ears, always alert to dangers enemies tried to conceal. One afternoon in Karen's office, Karoline was watching Bruno execute a search command when something unexpected happened. "Good job," she whispered, her voice so soft it was almost inaudible. David, standing nearby, turned to look at her, surprised to see Karoline show rare emotion. She gave a faint smile, her eyes shimmering with trust. Karen placed a hand on David's shoulder, whispering, "She trusts him, and sometimes trust is the first step to uncovering the truth." The atmosphere in the courtroom officially returned to thick tension as the trial resumed. The gallery was packed with journalists, government officials, and legal experts, all anxiously awaiting the next twist in one of Washington, D.C.'s most high-profile cases. At the room's center, James Carter sat at the defendant's table, his initial confidence now replaced by palpable unease. Karoline and Bruno entered, ready to face the next challenge in the fight to expose the espionage conspiracy. James Carter sat beside his attorney at the defendant's table in the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., his face coldly unreadable despite the grave accusations weighing on him. Still, his composure was unsettling, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the polished wooden table. Karoline Leavitt, White House press secretary, stood near the prosecution table, gripping Bruno's leash as if it were an inseparable part of her oversight role. The German shepherd sat alert beside her, ears erect, golden brown eyes locked on Carter. Occasionally, Bruno's nose twitched, as if catching a familiar scent in the air. "Rise!" the clerk's voice rang through the room as Judge Michael Sullivan entered, his black robe fluttering lightly behind him. He took his seat on the elevated bench, his sharp eyes sweeping the room before pausing briefly on Karoline and Bruno. He had ruled to allow Bruno's presence in the trial, a controversial but necessary decision given the national security context. "Before we begin opening statements," Sullivan said, his voice deep and in control, the court will hear arguments regarding this dog's presence in the proceedings. Richard Hayes, Carter's defense attorney, stood, smoothing his tie with a practiced motion. "Your Honor," he began, his tone polite but firm, "we acknowledge the prosecution's claim about the dog's supportive role, but its presence is highly prejudicial. A large German shepherd in the courtroom could elicit an emotional response from the jury, unfairly disadvantaging my client. We request its removal during testimony." Emily Carter, the lead prosecutor, shot to her feet to counter. "Your Honor," she said, confidently, "Bruno isn't a decoration. He's specially trained by the government to detect threats like listening devices or unusual behavior. His presence is essential to protect this trial's integrity, especially in a case tied to national security." Judge Sullivan leaned back, his face impassive. "I've reviewed reports from the animal training expert and national security unit. The dog stays," he declared. A ripple of murmurs spread through the courtroom. Some nodded in approval, others muttered discontent. Hayes pursed his lips, clearly displeased but unwilling to push further. He sat down, casting a quick glance at Carter, who maintained his oddly stoic expression. The trial officially began with palpable tension. Emily Carter painted a chilling picture of Carter's actions, a years-long espionage network manipulating classified Pentagon data for China. Witnesses were called, including Laura Thompson, a former Pentagon employee. Her voice quavered as she recounted seeing Carter exchange documents with a stranger in the agency's parking lot. "He was sneaky, like he knew he was being watched," she said, her hands clasped tightly. Karoline listened, occasionally tightening her grip on Bruno's leash, her eyes never leaving Carter. Whenever the air grew stifling, she glanced down at Bruno, who remained still, his presence a steady anchor amid the perilous tightrope. Then came the pivotal moment. The courtroom fell silent as Karoline was asked to address Bruno's findings. She stepped to the stand, poised yet calm, Bruno at her side. Emily Carter approached, her voice gentle but authoritative. "Ms. Leavitt, we know you're not a direct witness, but your and Bruno's roles have shifted this case. Can you explain what happened?" "A nod or details are fine, whatever you're comfortable with." Karoline didn't look at Emily, her gaze stayed fixed on Carter, her breathing steady. But then, sensing the tension in the air, she tapped her fingers on the stand. The familiar secret signal. Bruno reacted instantly. He stood, nose sniffing rapidly, then bolted toward the defendant's table. His low growl rumbled, eyes locked on Carter as if piercing through his facade. The courtroom froze, and Judge Sullivan leaned forward, his gaze piercing. Bruno pressed his body lightly against Karoline Leavitt's leg, as if sensing the tension in the air of the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. She bent down, grabbing a fistful of his fur, then slowly nodded at Emily Carter. "Good," Emily said, keeping her tone gentle yet commanding. "Miss Leavitt, can you tell us what anomaly prompted you to signal Bruno?" Karoline didn't lift her head immediately, her eyes still fixed on James Carter. After a long moment, she raised her hand, pointing directly at the defendant across the room. Carter's face didn't change, but a flicker of tension crossed his eyes, his jaw clenched in an involuntary reaction. Richard Hayes, the defense attorney, leapt up to object. "Your Honor," he said urgently, "this is baseless. Ms. Leavitt isn't a direct witness, and pointing like this is unreliable." Judge Michael Sullivan raised a hand, cutting him off. "Objection overruled," he stated firmly. "The jury will assess the reliability of this information themselves." Emily pressed on, her voice still calm. "Miss Leavitt, did Mr. Carter do anything to raise your suspicion?" Karoline didn't respond verbally. Instead, she made a small hand gesture, the familiar secret signal Bruno knew well. The German shepherd reacted instantly, ears up, muscles taut, a low growl rumbling from his chest. It wasn't aggressive, but a clear warning. Bruno's reaction jolted the courtroom. Judge Sullivan leaned forward, brows furrowed, while Richard Hayes shot up again, his voice sharp. "Your Honor, I object. This is cheap theatrics." But Sullivan ignored Hayes. His focus stayed on Bruno, now completely still, all attention on Carter as if sensing something only he could detect. The reaction mirrored the first time Bruno locked eyes with Carter, an instantaneous, unmistakable. A thought flashed in Sullivan's mind. He turned to Emily, his voice low and deliberate. "Miss Carter, has this dog encountered the defendant before?" Emily hesitated. "Not to my knowledge, Your Honor." Sullivan shifted his gaze to the defendant's table. "Mr. Carter, have you ever had contact with this dog?" For the first time, Carter showed real emotion. His fingers, once tapping steadily, clenched into fists. He remained silent, offering no answer. Emily's eyes widened, as if realizing something critical. She turned, whispering urgently to David Marshall, who bolted from the courtroom. "What's going on?" Richard Hayes snapped, his patience fraying. Emily straightened, her face impassive. "Your Honor, I request a brief recess. We may have just uncovered new evidence tied to this case." Judge Sullivan studied her for a long moment before nodding. 15-minute recess, he declared. As the courtroom emptied, murmurs spread like wildfire, speculation ignited fiercely. What had Bruno recognized in James Carter, and if so, where did it stem from? Sullivan felt a deep certainty that the answer would change everything. Pressure mounted on the prosecution as new developments emerged. James Carter had been linked to Chinese espionage, but the case risked collapsing without stronger evidence. What no one anticipated was that the key to unraveling it all wouldn't come from testimony, but from the dog never far from Karoline's side. The next morning, crisp air enveloped Washington, D.C., as the prosecution, led by Emily Carter, presented a new motion. "Your Honor," Emily said confidently, "we've analyzed the signal transmitter Bruno found. Its data points to a specific location, an abandoned warehouse in rural Virginia. We request a 24-hour recess to investigate further. We believe this is the final piece to close this case." Richard Hayes objected immediately. "Your Honor, this is just a delay tactic. My client has been thoroughly questioned, and there's no clear evidence." David Marshall, near the prosecution table, whispered to Emily, "I've seen this pattern before. If Carter has a hidden base, everything he's concealed will be there." Judge Sullivan nodded, his expression stern. "Motion granted. Court recesses for 24 hours." Soil samples are circumstantial evidence at best, Richard Hayes argued, his tone skeptical, but Judge Michael Sullivan's stern gaze silenced him. Motion granted, Sullivan ruled, his voice resolute. The prosecution has 24 hours. Court is recessed. As the gavel struck, David Marshall and his team sprang into action. Bruno, Karoline Leavitt's ever-watchful companion, was brought along for the mission. The dog's reaction to James Carter in the courtroom was unmistakable. Perhaps he sensed something the naked eye couldn't see. The investigation team reached the abandoned warehouse in rural Virginia by early afternoon. The stillness was eerie, broken only by the whisper of wind through surrounding trees. Thick dust coated the porch floor, but faint footprints leading to the back door suggested recent activity. Bruno reacted first as they approached. His ears shot up, nose sniffing intensely, body rigid, tail stiff, muscles coiled like a spring ready to launch. A low growl escaped as he crossed the threshold, his eyes sharp with alertness. "Something's off here," David muttered. "Bruno knows. There's something inside." The team entered cautiously, weapons at the ready. Inside, the warehouse was barren, a table, a folding cot, a pile of empty food cans stacked in the corner. But then David noticed something off. The wooden floor near the back wall had an unnatural seam, a faint indentation that seemed out of place. He tapped it. Hollow. "There's something under here," he said, his voice firm. With swift precision, the team pried up the plank. What emerged chilled them all. A narrow staircase spiraled down to a hidden basement. The air grew cold and damp as they descended, dim light revealing a horrifying scene. Old electronics, computer hard drives, tattered documents, and in the far corner, a small, tight-locked safe. Bruno strained at his leash, whining as if sensing the gravity of the discovery. David rushed forward, using a tool to break the safe's lock. Inside was an encrypted hard drive and a stack of papers, code names, dates, and transactions detailing military information transfers to China. "This is it," David said, his voice trembling with excitement. "We've got direct evidence against Carter." He clutched the hard drive, knowing this espionage nightmare was nearing its end, though much remained to be unraveled. Back at the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., news of the find spread like wildfire. The courtroom was packed as Emily Carter prepared to deliver a decisive blow to James Carter. Judge Sullivan allowed the new evidence, the hard drive and documents, into the record, alongside data from the signal transmitter Bruno had previously uncovered. "Mr. Carter," Emily said, her voice sharp as steel, "how do you explain classified Pentagon documents found in a warehouse directly tied to you?" For the first time, Carter showed panic. "I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered. Emily advanced, her voice unwavering. "Your fingerprints are on the safe, your tire tracks match those outside the warehouse, and most importantly, this hard drive's data will give us your entire espionage network." Her words landed like a boulder in the courtroom. A living piece of evidence that could shatter Carter's defenses. His carefully constructed calm began to crumble. Richard Hayes whispered something fiercely in his ear, but Carter was clearly cornered. And then it happened again. Bruno, lying at Karoline's feet, suddenly lifted his head, eyes narrowing at Carter. His fur bristled, a deep growl rumbling in his chest. The room fell silent as the German shepherd stepped forward slowly, his gaze locked on the defendant, a look of pure recognition. Carter flinched visibly. The man who'd maintained arrogance throughout the trial was now sweating, hands gripping the table's edge. He turned to Hayes, muttering something frantic, then whispered, "I want to change my plea." A roar of commotion erupted. Sullivan's eyes darkened. "Mr. Carter, are you saying you wish to plead guilty?" The room held its breath. Carter exhaled shakily. "Yes." The trial ended abruptly, sending shockwaves across the nation. James Carter was sentenced to life without parole, the fate of a traitor sealed. But the true hero of the case wasn't just the lawyers or investigators, it was Karoline Leavitt, who used her wits and Bruno to safeguard national security. After the verdict, she stroked Bruno's head, whispering, "Thank you." Bruno wagged his tail, pressing against her, proof of an unbreakable bond ready to face darkness, no matter how deep. The story of Karoline Leavitt's secret signal to her dog, Judge Sullivan's courtroom, and stunned silence reflects real issues in today's American society, particularly concerns about national security, trust, and technology. and the role of collaboration in tackling threats. In the tale, Karoline Leavitt, as White House press secretary alongside Bruno, exposed James Carter's espionage plot at the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. The listening device and hard drive with classified documents found in the Virginia warehouse aren't just fictional details. They echo real espionage scandals like Edward Snowden's leaks or allegations of foreign election interference. The U.S. today faces similar challenges: information breaches, data leaks, and threats from external forces jeopardizing democracy. In my view, Karoline Leavitt and Bruno's story is a wake-up call. Sometimes the sharpest tools against betrayal aren't high-tech gadgets, but instinct and loyalty. Bruno's scar proves resilience isn't just human, it's primal. And pairing that with Karoline's quick thinking feels like a blueprint for facing today's chaos. I think it's inspiring how trust in an unexpected ally can topple a traitor like James Carter. But I get it if you disagree. Maybe relying on a dog seems too wild when tech and evidence should rule. Still, doesn't this make you wonder what hidden strengths we overlook? I'd love to hear your take. Do you trust gut feelings or hard proof more? Thanks for watching this thrilling ride with me. Drop your thoughts below, hit that like button if you enjoyed it, and subscribe for more stories that make you think.